Discover a new, in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary. Unlike our previous review, which offers a focused analysis, this feature delivers a comprehensive overview tracing the intellectual roots, key arguments, and real-world impact of this subject. If you appreciate this expanded format and find it helpful, let us know. Your feedback will help shape future content.
It's definitely a different way to approach a text, especially one this dense.
Absolutely. And to kick us off, I have a question. What if the constant conflict you see in the news, that feeling that the world is always on the brink of disaster, what if that isn't a flaw in the system?
What if it's the product itself?
Exactly. What if it's the entire product? I really want you to ask yourself, do you feel almost addicted to that feeling? Because today we are unpacking Hate Inc. by Matt Taibbi.
And we should be clear, we're looking at the post-election edition. It has a preface that is just so crucial, titled A Utopia of Division.
And before we get any deeper, a quick note for you. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
So, A Utopia of Division. It's a striking title, isn't it? A utopia is supposed to be perfect, a society that works for everyone.
Right. Sun, peace, no problems. But that's not what Taibbi is getting at. This isn't a utopia for us.
No, and that is the whole point. He argues that the modern media environment has become a utopia for business models, models that are built on division.
So the core idea is that media companies have built this incredibly stable, profitable system that just runs on permanent conflict.
He has a great line for it. He calls it a great Giza pyramid complex of invective and digital ugliness.
I love that image, as dark as it is.
Yeah.
A pyramid of ugliness. It implies this isn't random, it isn't just a bad news day, it's a structure. It's been engineered.
Precisely, a self-reinforcing architecture of anger. And by 2020, the system was, well, it was fully operational. So our mission here is to explore how that architecture actually works. Not just the headlines, but the economic engine humming away underneath it all.
Let's start right there with the engine. When people complain about the news, they usually talk about bias, right? That channel is too left or that paper is too right.
Right.
But Taibbi is saying that bias is just a symptom. The disease is the business model itself.
Yeah.
So how does this utopia division make money?
It all goes back to a huge shift away from the old model. In the introduction, he talks about the death of broadcasting. Think of the nightly news back in the 70s.
Walter Cronkite.
Exactly. The goal was to reach the biggest audience possible with a story that was, broadly acceptable. You wanted the factory worker and the CEO to both tune in.
Because if you only have 3 channels, you can't afford to alienate half the country. You'd lose half your ad revenue. You almost had to be in the middle.
You did. But the internet completely changed that. The new model is narrowcasting, niche targeting. You don't want everyone anymore. You just want one very specific, very engaged demographic.
And how do you get them engaged?
With algorithmic amplification. You feed them exactly what they already want to hear, what they already believe.
So instead of a public square, we have what? Private clubs.
He calls them demographic pens. The goal is to herd audiences into these pens. And once you're inside, the stories you get aren't really news meant to inform you. They're attention hooks.
Hooks designed to pull you deeper and deeper into your own silo.
And what's the best way to keep you in that silo?
Make you terrified of the people in the other silo. Tell you there are wolves outside the pen.
That's the mechanism. Maximum outrage and mutual contempt to directly translate into maximum engagement. And engagement is the only metric that matters for profit in the digital age. If you're angry, you click. If you're scared, you share.
It's just a horrifyingly brilliant business model. You're selling validation, but it's wrapped in a constant state of anxiety.
And Taibbi argues this didn't just happen overnight. He points to the 2016 election as the moment this all became really visible. He calls Chapter 1 the beauty contest.
Ah, yes. The origin story.
That was the turning point. When the coverage just completely shifted to sensationalism and personality. It wasn't a job interview for president anymore. It was a spectacular contest, a horse race.
I remember that so clearly. News networks would just show an empty podium for 20 minutes, waiting for one candidate, while completely ignoring a serious policy speech happening somewhere else.
That's a perfect example. It felt like waiting for a concert to start, not a political event. The details didn't matter. The suspense did, keeping those rival audiences glued to the screen for the next big twist.
It creates a feedback loop, doesn't it? The most outrageous candidate gets the most airtime, which then makes them seem more viable.
It's reality TV. The loudest person in the room gets all the camera time.
So that leads into what he calls the 10 rules of hate in Chapter 2. These sound like system protocols. a recipe for converting simple disagreement into profitable hatred.
That's a good way to put it. It's a recipe.
So walk us through some of the main ingredients. If you know the recipe, maybe you stop eating the food.
Well, rule number 1 is huge. Always, always emphasize the worst examples of the other side. You never engage with their best arguments.
No, you find the single craziest person on social media claiming to represent them, or one violent person at a protest.
And you make that person the face of the entire opposition. It completely distorts your perception of reality.
What else?
Another one is framing every single story as a morality play. It's always good versus evil. There's no complexity. And maybe the most important rule of all, avoid nuance at all costs.
Nuance is boring.
Nuance doesn't get shares. Outrage gets shares.
And this ties into something else he brings up in Chapter 6, the invisible primary. While we're all distracted by these morality plays, something much bigger is happening behind the curtain.
This is such a critical point. We think we're watching democracy play out, but Taibbi says the game is rigged before we even get there. The invisible primary is all about the gatekeeping process.
But people vote in primaries. How is it gatekept?
They do, but before any candidate gets to Iowa, they have to survive the donors and the media establishment. The donors decide who gets the money to even run. The media narratives decide who is seen as electable.
So they're basically culling the herd before the public even gets a real choice.
They are, and the system is set up to make sure the final matchup is as polarizing as possible. They want high-stakes, all-or-nothing cage matches. That's what sells ads. A moderate candidate is just bad for business.
So we're not just citizens voting. We're an audience participating in a pre-scripted drama. It's a very compelling way to look at it.
It is.
Before we get deeper into the psychology of this machine, we want to mention Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, inspiring reflection and rational thought, invaluable for aspiring authors. It's a great place to step back from all the noise we're talking about today.
Rational thought is definitely the antidote here.
Right. So let's talk about the metaphors Taibbi uses. He compares the media to a church. That's intense. Chapter 3 is called The Church of Averageness.
It's a really powerful metaphor. He says the media functions like a religious institution. You have your high priests, the star correspondents, the big-name anchors.
And what's their job? To preach the gospel?
In a way, yes. Their job is to define reality for their tribe and to police the boundaries of acceptable opinion. They stay within this narrow band of shared assumptions, the averageness, but they keep the flock agitated. If you step outside that narrative, you're a heretic.
It creates that sense of belonging, doesn't it? We believe this, they believe that. It feels safe as long as you stay in line.
Exactly. And like a church, it has rituals. Which brings us to Chapter 5 and the pollsters.
See, I've always just thought of polling as data, numbers. How is that a ritual?
Because of how they're used. Taibbi sees the pollsters as the numerologists of this church. They provide a constant stream of numbers that are used to feed anxiety.
They create that feeling of a never-ending contest.
That's it. Your team is down by 2 points. Panic. Or, we're surging. Donate now. It keeps you on the hook, always feeling like your side is either on the verge of victory or total disaster.
Speaking of drama, my favorite analogy in the whole book is in Chapter 7. Pro wrestling. Taibbi says the news has basically stolen its entire playbook from wrestling.
This is probably the most brilliant part of the book. It's all about the concept of kayfabe.
Kayfabe, I love that word. What is it exactly?
In wrestling, kayfabe is the performance of a staged event as if it's real. The wrestlers know it's an act, the promoters know it's an act, and deep down, the audience kinda knows it's an act. But everyone agrees to play along for the drama.
So the pundits screaming at each other on TV are just performing a script.
A lot of the time, yes. They're playing roles. You have the heel, the bad guy, and the face, the hero. They have their scripted feuds, their dramatic reversals. It's not about civic debate anymore. It's a soap opera.
That makes so much sense. It explains why nothing ever actually gets solved.
Yeah.
If the conflict is the product, then solving the problem would destroy the product.
You can't have the hero defeat the villain for good. The show would be over. You need that villain to come back next week so the audience keeps buying tickets.
This all sounds completely exhausting for the viewer. And if we know it's a performance, why do we keep watching? Which leads us to the darker side of this. Addiction. Chapter 8 compares the news to smoking.
It's the addiction model. There's a trigger, usually boredom or some kind of uncertainty. That leads to anxiety. You check the news to relieve the anxiety. You get a brief hit of relief or validation, and then that fades, which leads to more anxiety.
Doom scrolling.
Exactly. And the system is designed to keep you in that loop. It's not there to inform you, it's there to keep you needing that next hit.
And to keep you scared, you need monsters. He talks about folk devils in Chapter 9.
A folk devil is a person or group that gets portrayed as an existential threat to society. The media creates these villains tailored to the specific fears of their audience to keep them mobilized and angry.
Okay, but this is the big question for me. If the spotlight is always on these monsters, these folk devils, what are we not seeing? What's being hidden?
That is the most important takeaway in the entire book. Chapter 11. The Class Taboo. He calls it the great factual loophole.
Let's unpack that. This is where it goes from the media is annoying to the media is actively manipulating us. What is the class taboo?
Taibbi's argument is that major media outlets, both left and right, systematically downplay issues of material inequality. Class issues. Why?
The advertisers.
The advertisers. Major corporations are not interested in stories about stagnant wages or corporate profits. They don't want a class war.
So the media pushes us towards something else.
They push us towards symbolic cultural battles, identity politics. Culture wars are great for the business model. They generate tons of passion and division, which is good for ratings, but they don't threaten the underlying economic system.
So instead of talking about why people can't afford a house, we argue about cartoon characters.
Precisely. We argue about the drapes while the house is on fire, and it feels like a sport. Which is Chapter 12. How we turn the news into sports.
The sportsification of reality.
You're a lifelong fan of Team Blue or Team Red. You hate the other team just because they're the rival. It's about loyalty and predictable outrage, not policy. You just tune in to watch your team score points.
But what if you don't want to play? What if you try to talk to someone on the other team? He mentions the Scarlet Letter Club in Chapter 14.
That's the enforcement mechanism. To keep the utopia of division working, you have to stop people from crossing tribal lines. So the system uses public shaming, pile-ons, canceling to punish anyone who breaks ranks.
So if I'm a liberal and I find a point of agreement with a conservative,
you risk being branded a traitor. It keeps the walls high. It prevents any real dialogue that might, threaten the business model.
I do want to clarify for our listener, this isn't a critique of just one side. Looking at Appendix Number 1, Taibbi very deliberately put Rachel Maddow on the cover.
Yes, that was intentional. He makes it clear this applies across the board. The system is an industry standard, not a partisan one. He also interviews Noam Chomsky in Appendix Number 2, which is fascinating. He bridges Chomsky's classic manufacturing consent idea with this new digital reality.
Right. Chomsky's idea was that the media created consensus for elite interests. How is this different?
Chomsky was writing about the broadcast era, one dominant narrative. Taibbi's describing the narrowcast era. It's about platform-driven tribalism. The internet fragmented the mechanism, but the result is still manipulation.
We're addicted, we're in pens, we're watching wrestling, and we're ignoring the real economic problems. It sounds incredibly bleak. What's the solution? In Chapter 13, he offers advice that sounds almost too simple.
The chapter title says it all. Turn it off.
Just turn it off. That's it.
It sounds simple, but think back to that addiction cycle. To break the system's hold, you have to interrupt the habit. You have to stop participating in the outrage machine. Disengagement is the one real way to take back power.
So the only winning move is not to play.
Or at least to stop letting them set the rules of the game. To go find information that isn't being fed to you by an algorithm designed to make you angry.
So to wrap this up, we are living in a great Giza pyramid of conflict. It's engineered to keep us angry, addicted, and distracted from the real economic issues that affect us all.
And we have to see that this utopia of division is incredibly profitable for them, but it is toxic for us. The first step is just recognizing the game is rigged like pro wrestling. The people screaming on your screen are playing a role. Don't let them write your reality.
That's the perfect takeaway. So
Yeah.
here's a final thought to leave you with. You probably feel very passionate about your political beliefs. You feel that anger when you see a headline. But you have to ask yourself, is that passion truly yours? Or is it a product feature that was just sold to an advertiser?
That's the question that can change everything.
We want to thank you for listening to this deep dive. If you want to go even further, click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
It's been a pleasure unpacking this.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.